You're standing in a Roman cemetery. Rows of small stone markers, packed tight, stretch out in every direction. Most of them belong to children. Some were only days old when they were buried here. And because of how many of them there are, you've been told your whole life that ancient people died at 30. That number is a lie. Not because it's wrong, because it doesn't mean what you think it means. A man in ancient Rome who made it past his 5th birthday had a decent shot at meeting his grandchildren. A woman who survived childbirth could live to see gray hair and aching joints. 30 wasn't a death sentence. It was a math trick, and the trick has fooled us for centuries. But to see how it works, we need to go back. Not to Rome, to the numbers themselves. To the way a single age group, one you barely think about, can warp an entire civilization story. Let's turn the page. Here's the setup. When someone says life expectancy was 30 years, what they're really saying is this. If you took every baby born in a given year, tracked each one until they died, and then averaged all those ages together, you'd get roughly 30. That's it. That's the whole number. Every single death, from a baby who lasted 3 days to an old farmer who collapsed at 72, gets thrown into the same pot and stirred. Now think about what that does. If a huge chunk of those babies die before they can walk, the average plummets. It doesn't matter that plenty of adults are living full, long lives. The math doesn't care. The dead infants drag the number down like an anchor, and suddenly an entire civilization looks fragile. At a cemetery near Pompeii, researchers examined over 2,000 skeletons. They measured bones, counted teeth, analyzed the wear patterns on joints, and when they crunched the numbers, they got an average age at death of about 28. 28. That sounds brutal. It sounds like nobody made it past their prime. But here's what those same researchers found when they asked a different question. What if you only count the people who made it to age 5? What's their average remaining lifespan? The answer jumped to around 45 more years. A 5-year-old in ancient Pompeii could expect, on average, to live past 50. Reach 15, and your odds got even better. You might see 60. You might see 70. The gap between 28 and 50 isn't medical progress. It's just subtraction. Remove the children who died early, and the ancient world starts to look shockingly familiar. So why did so many children die? Picture this. You're a mother in the Nile Valley, roughly 2,000 years ago. Your baby is 3 weeks old. There's no clean water. There's no understanding of bacteria. The cord was cut with whatever blade was handy. Infection creeps in quietly at first. A fever, swelling. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's too late. In burial sites across Upper Egypt, more than a third of infant remains show signs of blood poisoning. Not war wounds, not famine, infection. Invisible, silent, and relentless. Out of every 1,000 babies born in the Roman world, roughly a quarter died before their first birthday. Think about that. A quarter. 250 tiny lives gone before they could form a single memory. And the dying didn't stop there. Between ages 1 and 5, another wave hit. Fevers, gut infections, diseases that today we knock out with a $10 prescription. Those illnesses swept through with nothing to stop them. By the time a Roman birth group reached its 5th year, nearly half of them were already in the ground. Now picture a funnel. You pour 1,000 colored beads in at the top. Right away, the smallest ones slip through a mesh near the opening. Then a slightly larger mesh catches more. What pours out the bottom, maybe 500 beads, those are the survivors. And those survivors aren't weak leftovers. They're the ones whose bodies fought through the worst gauntlet the ancient world could throw at them. They are, in a grim way, the toughest of their generation. But that still doesn't explain something. If surviving childhood gave you decades more to live, why don't we hear about ancient old people? Where are the 70-year-olds in the history books? They're there. You just have to know where to look. In medieval England, parish clerks kept records. Births, marriages, deaths, written in cramped handwriting in leather-bound books that somehow survived centuries of damp and neglect. Researchers combed through those records and built a picture of survival, generation by generation. Out of every 1,000 births they tracked, roughly 80 people made it to age 60. That's 8%. Sounds low, but remember, this is 8% of everyone born, including all those infant deaths. Among those who reached adulthood, the number living to 60 was far higher. Growing old wasn't some miracle. It was normal for the people who cleared the early hurdles. The same pattern shows up in Han Dynasty China. Scholars pieced together survival records from administrative documents and burial data. Again, massive losses in the first 5 years. Again, the survivors stretching well into later life. Different continent, different culture, different century. Same story. The early years killed you or they didn't. If they didn't, you had time. Here's where it gets strange though. You'd think this pattern belongs to the dusty past. Ancient plumbing, ancient medicine, ancient ignorance. But fly to Central Africa today and you'll find the exact same mathematics playing out in real time. In some of the poorest nations on Earth, average life expectancy hovers in the low 50s. Headlines read that and paint a picture of entire populations dying young. But look closer. In Chad, a child who makes it to 5 can expect to live into their early 60s. That's a jump of nearly 15% just by surviving childhood. The funnel is still there. The mesh is still catching the smallest beads. The survivors still pour through. This isn't ancient history repeating itself. It's the same biological reality, dressed in different clothes. Wherever childhood disease runs unchecked, the average age at death collapses. Not because adults are dying young, because children are dying before they ever get the chance to be adults. Now, someone watching this might push back, and they should. The skeletons we study, the cemetery records we dig up, those aren't random samples. Archaeologists find what survived. They find what was buried in ways that preserve bone. And wealthy families in Rome, the ones with better food, cleaner water, and access to whatever passed for medical care, they often cremated their dead. Their bones are ash. Their data is gone. So it's fair to ask, are we overstating how bad things were? Maybe the rich lived longer and we just can't see it. Maybe the cemeteries we excavate are full of the poor, the sick, the unlucky, and they skew our picture darker than reality. That's a real concern, and scholars argue about it constantly. But here's the thing, even elite families lost children. Even palace households buried infants. Better food helps. Cleaner surroundings help. But without germ theory, without antibiotics, without even basic understanding of how disease spreads, no amount of wealth could fully shield a newborn. The rich had better odds, but the funnel still caught their beads too. And there's another wrinkle worth pulling at. When we talk about adult mortality in the ancient world, we tend to focus on men dying in battle. Swords, arrows, siege warfare. Dramatic stuff. But for women, the deadliest battlefield was the birthing room. In rural Roman communities, the annual risk of a woman dying in childbirth sat at roughly 2%. That doesn't sound like much until you do the math across a dozen pregnancies over a lifetime. The cumulative risk climbs to something like 1 in 8. 1 in 8 women dying because they gave birth. That's not a footnote. That's a crisis hiding inside the larger crisis of child mortality. And yet we rarely hear about it. Popular history gives us gladiators and legions. It rarely gives us the woman who bled out on a straw mat while her third child screamed its first breath. Her death counted too. It lowered the average too. But it gets lost in the shadow of the infants. So what does all of this change? It reframes every piece of ancient history you've ever read. When you hear about a Greek philosopher who wrote until he was 70, you shouldn't think of him as some rare exception who beat impossible odds. He beat the childhood odds. After that, his lifespan wasn't much different from yours. When you hear about a Roman senator debating policy in his 60s, that's not remarkable for his age. It's unremarkable. Plenty of adults reach those years. The trick is, they had to survive the starting line first. Think of it like a race where half the runners collapse before the first mile marker. The ones who make it through that opening stretch, they run a perfectly normal race. Nobody watching from the middle of the course would think anything unusual is happening. But average the whole field, include the ones who never left the start, and suddenly the overall pace looks absurdly slow. The start was the problem, not the race. But this pattern doesn't hold everywhere, and that matters. In societies with strong communal child-rearing, extended nursing periods, and geographic isolation from major trade routes that carry disease, under 5 mortality could drop well below the Roman average. Some Maya sites show child loss rates closer to 45%, others lower. The funnel wasn't the same width everywhere. Climate, culture, food systems, they all adjusted the mesh. The universal truth is that early childhood was dangerous. The specific danger varied wildly, and new science keeps refining what we know. Researchers now count the growth rings in tooth cement, the same way you'd age a tree, to estimate how old someone was when they died. This method is accurate within 2 or 3 years. Compare that to older techniques that could be off by a decade. Every improvement in our tools chips away at the fog, and what we keep finding is the same pattern sharpened. Die young or live long. The middle ground was thin. If this story made you rethink a number you thought you understood, there's a deeper lesson buried in it. Statistics don't lie, but they can hide. The next time you see an average in any headline, in any era, ask yourself what got dragged into that number that doesn't belong in the story being told. That instinct is worth more than any data point. If you want to keep pulling at threads like this, exploring the hidden stories behind the numbers everyone repeats, subscribe. The next chapter is waiting. 30 was never a finish line. It was a shadow cast by the smallest graves, stretching long enough to cover an entire world.